of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, 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 not God Bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God damn America as long as she tries to act like she is God and she is supreme.
Hello, motherfuckers. Welcome to Pod Damn America, the goth socialist podcast. I am Jake Flores, the king of all governors. I've decided I'm going to start making up titles for myself. Or the original king of all governors. I came up with that on this podcast I did with these weirdos in Boston a week ago.
King of all governors?
The original king of all governors.
Like the president?
I don't know. I think it's a bit. I'm going to start coming up with like Daenerys Targaryen style nicknames, like I'm a celebrity boxer or something. We should all make them.
Duke Flores.
Duke, the original king of dukes. Hello, everyone. Greetings of the motherfucking damned, and welcome to the show. This week, I have with me Anders Lee.
Anders Lee here. I'm wearing a black shirt.
Wow, a bold-faced lie.
Yeah.
This isn't black?
Is that looks gray to me?
Well, it was black at one point.
Oh,
Definitely not black.
All right.
Oh, it's even more metal. It's like faded.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. Returning guest of the show, Naomi Karavani. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
And another guest we'll be talking to today, Mellie Macker, author of a Medium piece about how to talk to people, how to argue during the draconian abortion bans.
To argue at all.
Right? Yeah. Which we'll get into. Welcome to the show, Mellie.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we'll just start off right with your piece. I don't really feel that we need to explain too much to the audience what's going on. If you live in America, you're probably aware right now various states are introducing backdoor abortion bans in sort of an attempt to probably eventually overturn Roe versus Wade. This has sort of been the groundwork has been laid for it since like Kavanaugh. And obviously it's causing a lot of dialogue and discourse and shit. And we're gonna find ourselves arguing with pro-life people. They're sort of rearing their heads right now.
They're not here today, though.
Yeah,
they're not. Really
I'm leaving.
people.
Our audience is split down the middle, pro-life,
No, that's
pro-choice.
definitely true.
Our audience is pro-death. They're goths.
Exactly. I'm speaking to the perfect audience.
Yeah. So, tell me a little bit about this piece you wrote and why you wrote it.
Well, okay. So I've been an advocate for reproductive rights for a while. I worked for Planned Parenthood for like 2 years doing volunteer organizing and just general advocacy work with them. And I ran into a lot of, like, especially when dealing with volunteers that would join Planned Parenthood, specifically to advocate for reproductive rights, like birth control and abortion. One thing that was really, really difficult to get a hold of was people's desire to just argue with pro-life people like that's going to do anything. And like, thanks to all of these laws that have been passed, there's a lot of just general discussion that's been going on. And none of it's particularly good, and it's never going to be fruitful. And so I just wanted to offer some like insight and guidance on how to actually discuss this with like hardline pro-life people. And effectively, like, you just shouldn't. You should never talk to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree.
And it's not because, like, I mean, you're never going to persuade them, but also, like, there's a certain, like, line of thinking that these people get into that you're just never going to be able to crack, because it's an activism for them that's deeply personal, that they're able to integrate their own, like, personality and their day-to-day life in. That it kind of transcends just like being committed to a religious ideology, which a lot of people seem to think you can just reduce it down to Jesus, but you can't do that because of how just like complex and the historical narrative of the pro-life movement has been. And then I think that like specifically for people on the left, like we get really caught up with like, what can we do? What are the things that we're going to do to counter these laws? Like, I don't know if you saw on Facebook or on social media in general, right after the Georgia law was passed, there were a bunch of people talking about like, oh, we're going to set up this thing called an anti-network, and all of the aunties are going to secretly like ferry women across state lines to get abortion. And it's like, can you just stop doing that?
Anti-fuck.
There's been a lot of people doing things already that you can help out.
We don't need an abortion cruise.
I mean, that
It's like a
literally
booze
exists.
cruise, but
That literally
more
exists.
booze.
There's literally a boat.
yeah.
There's a boat that like you can go to get an abortion if it's illegal in your country. Like,
they just go out to international waters and do the deed.
yeah, I can't remember what it's called. It's something like really meaningful, like viability or something.
Oh, it's done by a pirate.
yeah.
Yeah, it's basically
Someone
a
who
pirate
looks just like
abortion
Jake.
crew. It's real.
I should properly introduce your piece, by the way. I didn't have it pulled up when I started talking about this, but for anyone listening, it'll obviously be linked to in the notes. It's called A Brief Guide to Arguing About Abortion for Leftists in the Summer of 2019, which is important the way it's framed, I think, because we're in a specific moment, and it's from a left perspective. Obviously, we're going to understand, that some of the things that are happening right now that are insufficient because they are from bougie, like, rich white people, anti-abortion or pro-choice groups and shit like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, like, that's kind of a lot of, I didn't really get into this in the piece, but there's a significant amount of, like, the discussion that's going on surrounding, like, what we can do in this exact moment. People keep mentioning and bringing up organizations like Sister Song that do reproductive justice or abortion funds that you should donate to. And it's like the history of why those exist outside of, efforts like NARAL or Planned Parenthood, like larger, mostly like historically white, like very well financed organizations. The reason that the smaller groups like the abortion funds and Sister Song exist to provide access is because, like, right after Roe was decided, there's this history leading up to Roe where basically every feminist movement kind of came together in support of access to abortion, leading to the Roe decision. And then right after the Roe decision, it sort of split into two different factions, and one of them was the pro-choice movement, which is white ladies. White ladies with a bunch of money, and their whole line of thinking after Roe is that we just have to protect the Supreme Court decision, and the best way to do that is to reach out to more conservative white ladies to get their support also. And so you have, like, the cultivation of what's called the undue burden test, like what things can a state actually put in place that blocks a woman from getting an abortion, like at what point do those things become illegal? And that led
so
to,
there were all these kinds of restrictions that they were trying to make abortion clinics like be equipped for surgery where they didn't need to have them, those kinds of laws.
Yeah, so it was originally just an idea that was created by like these white ladies, and that concept of just focusing on abortion and keeping abortion legal only didn't quite serve underserved communities like the Black community specifically, because historically, like, abortion was kind of used in a weaponized way, and sterilization against those communities. And so when you only center abortion rather than a totality of reproductive care in order to empower people to make their own personal choices about their reproductive bodies, Planned Parenthood and NARAL initially did, like, there's a giant vacuum that needs filling. And so that's where abortion funds stepped in, and where Sister Song stepped in, and a number of other, like, Black women-led coalitions to provide community care in a localized way.
Yes. So you write about how there's been sort of a shift from, like, pro-choice to a broader reproductive justice, which you write is a more coherent goal. But even with that, you feel like there's still not a lot of consensus on the radical left about how to like actually talk about that and move forward on the issue. Do you think the laws that are coming up over the past few weeks, you think that's going to clarify things, or do you think that confusion is going to continue?
I think that the center on reproductive justice, rather than, they're obviously going to be used interchangeably because colloquially these things lack the meaning that they do in institutionalized settings. Mm-hmm. About 15 years ago, Planned Parenthood sort of looked at itself, recognized that it was underserving certain communities and that it wasn't available to the people that actually needed the services that they offered the most. And so they sort of had this like systemic shift towards helping women of color, helping poor communities, helping trans people. And that's all under the umbrella of what reproductive justice is. So you've sort of seen this shift in the tide, basically like since about 2005, but it's really gaining steam now, towards reproductive justice as the object goal. But for a lot of people who aren't like invested in it and aren't just completely mired in it, they'll use those two terms like in exchange for one another, mm-hmm. And might not understand justice, that centering abortion alone isn't going to be like the only necessary goal,
Right. Yeah. Which and a lot of it, and within that is Roe v. Wade that's tied up in the discourse on abortion in the United States. It kind of, at least since I can remember, that's how I think of it. But is Roe v. Wade, first of all, do you think that was a sufficient decision, like from a legal perspective, and also what are the limits it places on this discourse, just that decision from the 1970s?
The legal background on just abortion decisions is it's ridiculous. And honestly, like, a lot of the movement is to protect Roe from being overturned. But yeah, it's kind of in the prompt to your question. I don't think that Roe was sufficient. Because, there's a bunch of different reasons, but the biggest reason that comes to mind is that, like, it set up this dual notion for how abortion should be legislated, that basically, like, the state has a vested interest in protecting not only the life of the mother, but a potential life. And so in Roe, it set up, like, verbally that, after the third trimester, or unto the third trimester, which they denoted as just like, that's where viability happens. You can outlaw it. States can't outlaw it from there, which is why a lot of states already have, or, most states already have like 20 or 24 week bans. Mm-hmm. Those are constitutional under Roe. The biggest thing was that it didn't delve too much into, besides trimesters, how much the potential life, the state had invested in the potential life itself. And that was clarified in a landmark decision like Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which came in 1993. And that actually has more to do with the current atmosphere on abortion legislation than anything else.
And that's about access.
Yes.
Casey versus Planned Parenthood.
Right. And like, I just read it before I called you guys. It's insane. Like, the decision is written by Sandra Day O'Connor, and basically it says that, like, legislators can draw arbitrary lines, but courts can't. And so the court that decided Roe picked viability as that option. And so we're going to stick with viability, but we're going to rework what viability means. And so they throw out the whole trimester thing, basically reduce it to whatever a state wants. And then they say only where state regulation imposes an undue burden on a woman's ability to make a decision does the state reach into the heart of the liberty protected by the Due Process Clause, which is, that's just ridiculous. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But basically, like, the state can't restrict they can't say like you have to climb to the top of a mountain or every abortion is going to cost like $1 million. But what those restrictions are effectively left up to the state's legislative discretion, and you don't actually get like kind of a court's understanding of where those regulations come into play until like 2012, which was Whole Women's Health v. Hellerstadt, which was a decision out of Texas when they decided to say that like every abortion clinic in Texas had to be basically a hospital, and then every doctor also had to get hospital admittance. And you have that decision being written by Breyer that basically says like, well, you guys have to kind of hold your horses. Like,
was that the one that Wendy Davis filibustered?
That was was it?
I can't remember. I was at that. It was just a long time ago. And frankly, I lived in Texas, and there was one of those every fucking week.
Yeah.
Yeah, Texas is it's basically just like a cesspool of these things.
Yeah.
And like living in Arizona, we'd come up against things like this all the time. Like there's a ton of different measures that they're really creative. They can totally come up with, and all of these bills that they're pushing on state legislature levels are designed to just flex with Casey to see how far they can actually push it.
Yeah, there's like this weird abstract space that they could sort of work in that where they essentially are able to construct like backdoor bans.
Yes.
Like the 6-week thing.
Yeah, in the name of safety for the woman, where abortion is extremely safe.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on that a little bit because you talk about this in the piece about the way they sort of like treat the concept of the mother, you know, or as like the vessel for pregnancy, and never really refer to it as being sacred in any instance other than when it is, you know, the house for a baby to live in. It's when you're a host, you know. And that's really interesting because I like what you're talking about here in terms of in this piece. There's a lot of discussion of the ability for them to project, you know, various psychological anxieties onto this concept of the blank slate, the tabula rasa, just like fetus, which, you know, is very telling because they don't have any of these same, you know, passionate sort of feelings about like the person after that or the person before that. It's only this, you know, the weird blob thing that they love to make big posters out of and shit. That's because it, you know, isn't really a human life and can't speak for itself and doesn't have any identity. They're able to just like to just throw this weird fucking shrimp thing in your face and
totally project it on. They project like their interior lives onto these things. Like, one thing that was really interesting. So like in Arizona and at a bunch of clinics across the country, we have programs that are like clinic escort programs where you stand in the parking lot with a giant umbrella to block patients from the people on the street that are screaming at you to walk them inside
Bible
safely
verses.
So they don't so they don't feel harassed. But like in the time of doing that, I was able to witness these people without really interacting with them, and it's really interesting just to see the way that they emote and they project based on like the things that they're saying. They're screaming like half a football away, not to the person who's walking inside of the building, but to the fetus that could hypothetically be inside of that person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's like,
And they're screaming things like, "We love you. We'll always be here for you.
I love you, Blob."
There's a lady who's like every Saturday at exactly 10:30, she shows up with a megaphone and she's just like quaking. Like, and she's screaming into the megaphone, and it's basically just like, you know, stream of consciousness, but it's things like, I wish that I could protect you. I wish that I could hold you. I would feed you. I would make you feel better. And I want you to know that I have those, I would love to do those things for you so you're not alone. And it's like, it's really
creepy.
You know, when you see somebody projecting that much emotion just into the world, like you have to kind of, I mean, I have no sympathy for this woman in her day-to-day life because this is how she's decided to solve her problems. But like there is, there's an inherent sorrow there, you know?
I just find it so funny, this thing you sort of alluded to about like the fact that this person that's like screaming and holding the picture of this blob probably has grown adult children that they hate and don't talk to and shit. And they're like, no, this thing instead, this is my real kid, you know?
But sometimes they'll bring their children to protest too.
Yeah.
But it's like a whole family
really,
affair.
Really
we couldn't afford to go to Disney World, so we're going to go to the local Planned Parenthood.
I mean, yeah, it's
Bring
like
the blob sign.
I talk about a little bit about how there's like different factions. Like there's the lady who stands there and screams, and then there's like this church. It's called the Apologia Church. The pastor's name is Jeff Durbin, and it's basically like a huge scam. Like you have to pay $20 to go to mass. And they're trying to build a church in Hawaii. And he's got a podcast.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, man.
But yeah, those people basically treat it like Disneyland, and like, you know, the pastor and his, like, you know, the people that hang out with him, like his social media manager and stuff, they kind of treat themselves like rock stars. And they give big, cool speeches where they tell you that God is love. And, like, this is no cool. Like, I used to be an asshole, and now I'm amazing.
There's a reason that there's so many, like, I mean, aside from AA being inherently connected to Christianity, there's a reason that people that quit, like, that are addicts that quit drinking or something like that, then get addicted to that shit. The weird subculture of being in a church group is not dissimilar to the psychosis that we see in our open mic comedian friends that are essentially just competing for attention with each other and running operations where you have to pay $20 to go do a thing, you know, whether it be church in this situation or a fucking comedy show. I'm obsessed with just psychology of fucking freaks like this, and something that occurred to me in this piece that's really interesting I hadn't thought about before is you talk about the factions, the various different factions that come and protest you know, the Planned Parenthood line, and how they often bicker with each other. And it's interesting because I think before that, it never occurred to me. I always thought of them as being one big unified front because they all have the same thing, but they're all, you know, they all have various grievances with each other because they are, you know, they are these tiny factional groups that are not really there because they really believe in this thing. They're there for some way more deranged psychotic reason that has to do with, you know, their own egos. And that's really interesting to me. The other thing that's been really interesting to me reading about this is, you know, it's easy for us on this side of this thing to sort of write off all these people as, you know, just, oh, they're just a bunch of fucking Jesus freak hicks and they hate women. I mean, that's all true, you know, on some level, but, you know, we should really, like, know the thing we're trying to fight against. And someone published, like, a deep dive of just screenshots into Facebook groups where, you know, pro-life people were making their arguments. And it was, it's definitely one of those things where, like, you go in and you have to tie a rope to yourself and say, if I don't tug on it 3 times, pull me out of it because I'm losing my fucking mind in these Facebook groups. But I read it and I'm fascinated by that shit, and I'll get stuck in wormholes. I'm in a few like Trump groups on Facebook where I just don't post anything. I just lurk because I'm like, I want to know what these people are thinking about and shit. And something that occurred to me though is, you know, well, 2 things. One is a lot of liberals and people that are, you know, freaking out and against this but aren't really, I think, thinking about it hard enough, tend to think that the solution is electoral, and the solution is simply we just need to elect more women. And what they're sort of overlooking there is that there are a lot of women in the fucking government in these southern states, even in like
who are signing this legislation.
Yeah, and there's also Democrats, so you can't just go, hey, vote blue no matter what, and that'll fix this. You need to understand it on an ideological level. And when you read these, you know, these MAGA chuds and shit talking about pro-life, something that occurred to me that I think is key is that when I say they, it's fucking men, women, people of color, also everything across the board. They have this thing in common, which is that they consider this to be an issue of like personal responsibility. A lot of them, you know, their take on this is like, yeah, well, you know, maybe if you can't just go get an abortion, you won't be irresponsible and be hanging out at the clubs all the time and all that shit, right? Yeah. And that is very similar to the sort of the the aggrieved rhetoric of Republicans when they talk about other class-based shit, when they talk about like just welfare and stuff like that. They seem to think of it all as a weird like personal responsibility. It's a resentment. They have the same resentment as like the silent majority. And so in order to fight it, if you understand
they called themselves the moral majority for a reason.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm curious about how it evolved. I guess they probably wouldn't say evolved, but how it became sort of a religious.
Just stated.
Yeah. It was reborn into.
It's a miracle.
Yeah. Because I was reading a little bit about the history of opposing abortion, and originally one of the first guys was kind of a eugenicist, Horatio Storer, who in the 1860s was saying, like, we need to make sure abortion is banned because, like, shall America be filled with our own children or those of aliens? Then he says, this is a question that our own women must answer. Upon their loins depends the future destiny of the nation. So it was very much like a Keep America White movement.
Right.
Do you have insight onto how that sort of transferred or was I guess sublimated into a more religious thing?
Okay, so like the history of abortion and birth control in the United States is absolutely absurd. And it does, like, one of the things that we don't really talk about that often is how much the development of birth control, the implementation of birth control, and abortion are all tied into the eugenics movement in the United States and how big of a deal that was. And it's like,
even
it
though
kind
we
of
like hail Margaret Sanger as a hero.
Margaret Sanger was actually, see, this is the thing, she sucked towards the end, but basically she was persuaded by, because like when she was first starting out with Planned Parenthood and everything, like she was allied pretty closely with like Emma Goldman and a bunch of anarchists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there was this split about halfway through her activist life where she looked around and was like, we're not making enough money for me to keep this going on the scale that I want it to go to. And then like there was already this existing body of eugenicists with tons of money, like Rockefeller money, Carnegie money.
So it was a strategic move
the
for
Ford
her.
Foundation was huge. Like
She was a pragmatist.
all of these people.
Yeah.
And so like the anti-abortion, actually, so the pro-abortion movement, in like the 40s, was primarily just like a group of priests and doctors that were talking specifically with the people in their local communities about getting access to safe abortions because it wasn't legal then, and creating a sort of underground community where women could actually access this sort of thing. And it wasn't until Roe really just changed everything. And the moment that it became like this super religious, thing that everybody got really connected and into was in the aftermath of Roe, the rise of the religious right, and specifically Ronald Reagan. The election of Reagan really had a lot to do with it because he specifically was a person who he was able to rile up the Southern Baptists that had formerly been Democrats by saying that abortion should be outlawed. And that's sort of when the switch from them being on the side of Southern Democrats moved to the coagulation of a religious right. And they were able to basically just muster up fervor from all across Christianity, whereas before Catholics and Protestants had been extremely opposed to one another. They were all sort of unified under not just anti-abortion, but this family values circuit. And that's
the tour that Korn and Limp Bizkit went on in the 90s.
Yes. And that the organization that basically drew them all together and sort of took up the mantle of family values and anti-abortion and anti-gay legislation they called themselves the moral majority. And out of them, they had this more active on the ground faction called Operation Rescue, which people don't really realize. So back in the 80s and the 90s, they had these gigantic demonstrations where like grown adults would get on all fours and crawl into a clinic, and because it was like, a security issue, they'd shut down clinic operations for that day, and it'd be like hundreds of people just showing up to abortion clinics to just scream and cry outside, like way more than you see now. And that was also like the time where they were inciting people to literal violence. Like there were tons of bombings in the early 90s. People were getting shot at constantly. Like there was real physical violence that was coming out of this, and it was because the moral majority was able to consolidate this religious fervor with this. It's not just religious, and it's not just pro-white. It's also like an extremely classist opinion that they have that does eventually just sort of coagulate into the idea that like, you should have personal responsibility to not get pregnant in the first place.
Well, as you point out in the piece, this is all, in many ways, reproductive justice is sort of a foreign policy issue, because there are a lot of countries in the global south that the U.S. has given aid to or otherwise influenced, where we're able to sort of propagate a pro-life line there, depending on who's in power here. Yeah,
that's actually, it's an extremely difficult issue to really parse out, just because of the way that rhetoric surrounding birth control and abortion are just diametrically opposed to each other. You're either pro-life or you're pro-choice. But that's kind of it. The pro-choice movement has to work double time against itself, because a lot of people that are on the side of developing birth control pills and quote unquote bringing the idea of access to reproductive health in other countries are motivated by large eugenicist population control centers. USAID is extremely big into that. The World Bank also loves funding this sort of thing. And what ends up happening is it's not just benevolent NGOs telling people about their reproductive health. They have quotas to reduce population. And so that goes into the other side of reproductive justice in general, where people need to be able to have a decision. They need to be able to make choices. They can't just be duped by people who have a certain number of quotas into forcibly receiving an IUD implant and then are abandoned for the rest of their lives. So that's the reason that reproductive justice has to be so much of an umbrella, because of what American foreign policy has done to the world at large. We've taught people in the global south to mistrust U.S. foreign aid, and also have created an ethos in a number of these places where they're dependent on it for any form of medical health care. And the Trump organization, or the Trump administration, not the organization, the Trump administration just instituted this thing that Reagan did. It goes back and forth all the time. It's called the Gag Rule, that basically says that U.S. aid as a government institution for giving money to other countries can't give money if they suggest that abortion is an option for anybody at any time. They can't recommend care. They can't, suggest that it's a possibility. So that's just automatically cutting off reproductive aid to these people who, it's hard to just sever that system, even though it is predatory in certain circumstances. It's gotten a lot better recently, so.
Let's pause real quick.
I don't know if that makes any.
Okay. So I guess to sort of summarize what we're talking about here, the important part of putting this into a broad umbrella leftist perspective rather than just sort of a narrow liberal one is that this is that reproductive justice means a lot more than just just thin electoral stuff and just abortion, just these specific narrow things that it's been sort of whittled down to in the discourse in U.S. popular politics, I guess. The other thing we should talk about is what's going on right now with the corporate funding, I guess, which Naomi, you wrote and performed a sketch about on RT. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I read a thing yesterday that Netflix is one of the people that donated a bunch of money to these.
So this site, Popular Info, posted basically the research. They went into the campaign financing behind all these candidates that voted for these abortion bans or wrote the legislation in especially like Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Ohio. And they found that like these corporations like AT&T, like Pfizer, who promote themselves as very female friendly and say like, look at all the female CEOs we have, and Walmart especially, but they're actually donating money. And AT&T donated more than $100,000 to Governor Kay Ivey, who signed the Alabama abortion bill. So right. I think, that's like one piece of the pie. And then I saw, after I read this article, I saw an opinion piece in the Washington Post that said, can corporations save us from the attack on reproductive rights?
Cool. Hell yeah.
So,
can they?
So, I mean, I think there is one piece of it to show how the hypocrisy of these corporations, where they're like, Pfizer specifically just interviewed their female CEOs and were like, who do you admire? And they're all like, Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Oh my God.
All of them said Ruth Bader Ginsburg or Michelle Obama, and it's just like they're with their other hand, they're giving money to these people who are signing this legislation, just making it harder for a lot of women in their state.
I wonder how they stand on aborting corporations, because if they believe corporations are
listen.
Legally.
Corporations are people, okay?
Yeah.
Corporations are blobs too.
Right.
That's sort of funny because if you think about it all, like if you put all of it together into context, then what it means to be an employee who's a woman who works at Walmart or something is that you can work there and you can supposedly rise up and become someone who becomes a CEO or some sort of high-level executive, but simultaneously...
Or Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
You get, by their own policies... You can't protect yourself from an unwanted pregnancy, and then when it happens, you can't have time off to take care of it. Like it just...
but it's also a class issue. They're saying like our management is mostly female, but really these bills are fucking the poor mostly.
Right.
So they're the casualties of this experiment.
And the companies aren't necessarily pro-life, right? They just give money to everybody who looks like they're going to win.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They're just handing out money to make sure that they have that they have their interests.
Oh, okay. That's a good point, because I was kind of wondering, like, are all these fucking, like, is the person that owns Netflix, like, are they in these crazy moral majority groups, or is it?
No, they're just giving money to the people who will win. That's all.
Oh.
But they are supporting these people. They're helping them win.
Right. Okay.
They are financing their campaigns, and so.
I see.
That's it's an interesting aspect of it. I guess it is an overstatement to say that these corporations are willingly funding the attack on reproductive rights.
Right.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that they are willingly doing so because they don't care, and that's still a motivation.
Right.
And like, as you're pointing out, like the focus of the corporations themselves is to, they're reinforcing the idea that like all of these strong, empowered women should be able to still access abortion when like it's been the even since Roe, the most vulnerable communities and populations haven't been able to access abortion at all. And then like you have things like the Hyde Amendment that basically said that Medicaid isn't going to cover abortions unless it's specifically life-threatening. And like even the statute that upheld that like specifically said that the state might make childbirth like an attractive alternative by influencing women to think differently, but by not providing them compensation or coverage for abortion, like they're not instituting an impediment towards actually receiving one. And so like I mean, I think that for the left specifically, like you can turn this into a class issue. I mean, because it definitely is. Like,
it's totally a class issue in that anytime anything's outlawed, it's only outlawed for poor people.
Yeah,
if you're
Right.
because
rich,
they're the easiest to fuck over. That's just the way it is.
Well, I mean, money is just power. So, like, if you're rich and and we do go on with a full overturning of Roe versus Wade, you're still going to be able to have a fucking abortion. There will be a way for it to happen. You can fly to another fucking country or something.
Right.
Which is why it's so.
Well, I mean, you won't even have to fly to another country because the federal government's never going to actually make a law that outlaws abortion for the entire country. Like, what you're going to see is there are certain states that, I mean, there's 15 states that already have laws that go into effect the moment that Roe is overturned that outlaws abortion for those states individually. And then you have other states that are passing, like, rights to abortion, like Nevada did yesterday. So.
But yeah, as I understand it, like, the bans won't be able to go into effect for very long because they won't be upheld in the courts, in the federal courts.
Okay.
Yeah, they won't go into effect basically at all. They're going to be challenged before they're implemented. And usually it's like 30 to 60 or 90 days after the law is passed. And so it's going to be like July 1st. Some of them don't even go into effect until next year. Like the Georgia one does not go into effect until January 1st. And even then it's probably going to like receive an injunction from the court that's going to delay it from being implemented until like a Supreme Court decision is made. And so that's important to keep in mind. Like, abortion is not illegal anymore.
All right. Let's see. Where do we go from here? I'm gonna pause again. Okay, go ahead.
So yeah, like there's not just like so a lot of the discourse surrounding like what can you actually do for any of this stuff? Like people do have like a natural impulse to actually get out there and do activism for things, and you can show up to protests. I know that a lot of people don't like that, and that's totally fine because it is kind of depressing and fruitless. But I think that on the left, like there's definitely a vacuum in terms of what sort of mutual aid we can actually do. There are probably already like ride shares that are set up in your communities. Like, I mean, I just moved to Eastern Wyoming and there's not an abortion fund that's out here. And so I'm going to work on getting one of those set up and also a ride share. And then I'm going to like take a class on becoming a doula so that I can like inform my direct community. And, you know, finding different ways to provide reproductive care in times of a lack of that, I think is going to be extremely important for people on the left to like step into in terms of being allies. Because like, you know, what we should be good at is providing mutual aid for people. And that doesn't have to necessarily be monetary. It can be physical. You can give rides to people who need access to clinics. You can go stand in front of the clinic in between patients and the people that are screaming at them every day.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can educate yourself. I personally, like when I was working in Arizona, I came up with this idea for like creating a guerrilla sex education program, because in a lot of states you can't, like the flexibility for what you can actually teach in a sex education class isn't going to keep young people safe.
Yeah, and also a lot of parents will sign waivers so their child doesn't.
Yeah,
hear
most programs
stuff.
are opt out, not opt in.
Yeah,
Or opt
I
in,
had a
not
lot
opt
of.
out.
Yeah, I was teaching in New York City, and in fact, we had a few girls who got pregnant during their high school years, and a lot of them opted out of sex ed.
I oddly had to take one of those classes in high school because I just went to a really shitty, underfunded public high school. And in ninth grade, I got into a fight with someone. And then, like, the next day, some TA came into the classroom, and they're like, Flores, come with me, you know, and they take me off to the office. And they go, it's a school policy. You get in a fight, you have to take anger management. And so they took me into this office, and I sat down, in front of this like guidance counselor, this woman who, was sitting there waiting for it to turn 3:00 or whatever, next to just two like female students, just two like some women or whatever, and I was like, are you in anger management? Like, what the fuck is going on? And this woman goes, She goes, okay. She opens this big binder and she shows it to us. She goes, this is a syphilitic vagina.
Awesome.
Welcome to sex ed. And I was like...
And you were the only 3 who were allowed to receive it? Or?
I was like, I think they told me I'm supposed to be in anger management. And she's like, it says Flores, right? Your name's on the list. You're going to have to...
Oh my God.
You're going to have to watch the seminar or whatever. It was just like a clerical error or whatever.
Yeah.
I had a class like that.
I never got pregnant since.
Yeah.
Good. I went to an all-girls Catholic high school, and the only sex ed that they gave us was they would, like, resurrect this ancient nun from her crypt every year. She was, like, 1,000,000 years old, and she had, like extremely loud slides that she would show, and she'd be like, and this is gonorrhea of the eye. This is the gonorrhea of an entire baby's head. And it was just horrifying pictures of that.
It's the other miracle of life.
Just gore photos, basically. When you said resurrect, I thought you meant they did like a fucking fake, like the power of life, you know?
They did that too, just in different.
Yeah, that's so funny.
I'm lucky, I guess. I mean, I went to a charter school, so they didn't have sex ed, but I was sent to a Unitarian church where they were just very pro masturbation. They would just like tell us to masturbate.
You did our
I did our whole lives, yeah.
Program.
You still don't know how to do it, though.
I don't do it. Well, I don't do it in the traditional way, but I found my own. They said
a goofy style, like a skateboarder.
Well, you know, what other? I mean, as the instructor said, you masturbate, you can't get an STD, you can't get pregnant. How can you beat it?
All right.
How can you beat it?
How can you beat it?
Only
in many
one
ways.
way.
There's many ways.
I went to a Montessori school where we teach ourselves sex ed.
You illustrate it.
So I guess, this is two things I'm kind of thinking about simultaneously as we talk all this stuff are, the mutual aid stuff, the what can we do materially to actually make a difference in this current climate and in the context of how all these laws are actually implemented and how they work, which is, the things that you're telling us that that are a little bit more complex than just vote fucking blue or whatever, which is what a lot of people just fall into, given the anxiety that we're all in, post Trump and everything. The other thing for me is trying to understand, I guess, where that anxiety comes from to begin with, the existential nature of this, and why you need to understand the history of these things materially to understand how we got into the situations we're in and how our opponents got into the situations they're in. And I think that's so important. I'm saying all this to segue into my next segment, which is I think I'm going to be doing a recurring segment on this show from now on. Called Yang Thoughts.
Thoughts.
I've been reading a lot of Andrew Yang's Twitter lately because he follows me for some reason, and he said something that really exemplifies a misunderstanding of all of the material historical analysis that we're talking about. He said this, I think, yesterday. Andrew Yang, according to the twin studies, between 1/3 and 1/2 of political alignment is linked to genetics. What? That is
what the fuck?
Most of us are born somewhat wired to be liberal or conservative. If this is the case, we need to build bridges as much as possible, not just info or culture. This is a thing that I think a lot of people think about when they look at the political divides in this country in terms of Democrat or Republican or pro-life or pro-choice. I agree with what you say in this article, which is when you talk to a pro-life person, like, you will not change their mind. They're too far gone at this point.
Although, maybe they would be pro-abortion if you take this Yang logic and say, like, so let's abort all the pro-choice left-wing people.
But you have to admit that there are some misconceptions that they have. They're like, Democrats, support infanticide, and, the majority of abortions are in the first trimester.
I totally agree that they do have those misconceptions. I just don't think that they are just because they are, that you can't just reduce it to, they're just a bunch of fucking inbred, rednecks, or as Andrew Yang would tell us, they're simply just born that way. That there's just a gene that's going to make you pro-life and one that's going to make you pro-choice, and then and that just lays the groundwork for the conflict that we're all in, and then just go fight, and then we all end up in Ragnarok or Valhalla or however the fuck this thing ends.
Well, I think you're completely right about that, and that's sort of what I'm trying to get to in the thing that I wrote. Like, maybe if we actually change the material conditions for these people, like if in changing everything for the better so that people are able to like economically elevate and support themselves and receive medical attention, like that they require, if we meet people's material needs, the odds of them being this wound up about other people's bodies is bound to go down. Like that's, and that might sound crazy to some people, but that's something that I just fundamentally believe, that like,
no, I totally
making
agree.
Everybody's lives better, we can just probably get rid of a lot of these people.
It does sound a little bit like a big grand idea or whatever, but I mean, it is all linked to just where did these Trump people come from to begin with, which is
the womb.
Oh, true. But yeah, I mean, a component, at least in fighting all this stuff, is going to be, having a conversation with your friend who might fucking, vote or make some decision that ultimately leads to all this stuff, and understanding people and, I don't know, fighting some big fucking cultural war.
Mellie, what do you think of like the young people? Because obviously the older people in the pro-life movement are too far gone. But if there's somebody who's, maybe comes from an apolitical household, but they go to a Catholic school and then like they're learning all this stuff, is that worth dialogue? Talking to people before they get totally indoctrinated? Is there a way to do that?
It's really weird because like, I mean, people get really indoctrinated there's literally like pro-life camps that people send their children to. Yeah. And it's they're so distant from public society and kept inside of like these communities and then released into the world where they're like, at a pro-life tabling event. They're just as unshiftable as everybody else, but that's just because of like from their youth, they've been indoctrinated. That young people that are super into the pro-life movement are an animal that I can't even grasp.
Well,
I don't.
Well, maybe we should refer to the wisdom of Andrew Yang. And at Andrew Yang, this is something he tweeted the other day. I find my mind works better when I read a lot. That's it. That's the whole tweet.
Wow, he's so cool.
I mean, that is wisdom. He's dropping some gems here.
He's so fucking deep. I guess he's been going on Rogan lately, so that's where he's getting a lot of this shit.
Wait, who is Andrew Yang?
Andrew Yang is one of the people that's running for president. He's a joke. That's probably why you haven't heard of him. He's one of the lower tier ones. Although he is out, he's polling better than Cory Booker apparently right now.
Oh shit,
that's hilarious.
He's the UBI guy. His thing is you get $1,000 a month from the government, which is deceptively. It sounds like a leftist policy. It sounds like a sort of. I mean, in some places it has been implemented. But the way he wants to do it is more of a, like, in the tradition of, Nixon introduced.
Just take away Social Security and just take away all that shit and give you the grant.
Yeah. And Andrew Yang's basically a technocrat who, like, it's very telling that he has a following of Pepe Frogs, and sort of like a lot of the alt-right guys switched to.
Yeah, because he's Asian, and they're like, oh, this proves that we're not racist because we think Asians are smarter than us. And this guy's a tech entrepreneur.
I'm not racist. Asians are very good at math.
Yeah.
I think he was Asian. Have you ever seen Cable Guy? Okay.
No, never.
In other news, just to round things out, so we don't, our episode this week isn't a complete bummer.
Sorry.
Some other things are going on this week in terms of the bipartisan world, as has been sort of brought up, I guess, in this episode regarding the Democrats that have sort of crossed the line on this issue. Our girl AOC is working with Ted Cruz for some reason on a bill to essentially make outlaw ex-Congress members from becoming lobbyists. It's interesting. I looked into it, and I think it's a really weird story. I think what's going on is that it's pretty easy for ex-Congress people to become lobbyists anyway, even even when it's illegal, like there's like a loophole where you can still donate the money without your official title being that you're a lobbyist or whatever. So it's like, it's fucking weird. I don't know why either of them are doing this. It happened on Twitter where they were it was a very flirty interaction. The reason I bring it up is because I think she's trying to win a date with Ted Cruz.
Yeah.
I don't like that.
The Chronicle, the Houston Chronicle, just tweeted this story out a day or two ago that Ted Cruz's campaign is doing a fundraiser where they're raffling off a date with Ted Cruz. It's disgusting. Frankly,
He's launching some kind of charm offensive here.
yeah. I think it's immoral. I think it's disgusting.
I feel like he tried this before and it failed.
Nobody showed up to the auction.
Yeah.
I got stood up at my
nobody bid on
auction.
having dinner with them.
He's the dud from the dating game on The Simpsons. Yeah, I don't know. It's really funny because, like, who is going to... I guess, the implication here is that, like, women are going to be, like, fighting with each other over a chance to go out to eat with Ted Cruz, but...
I mean, anybody could use that on the gram.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't it just going to be some shitty Texan guy, though? Like some old man? And they're going to end up like...
Maybe.
I guess
Yeah.
what I'm wondering is, do you try to fuck Ted Cruz if you
do that?
if you win the date?
Well, apparently he's had affairs with like journalists in Washington, according to some people. It's weird that he's teaming up with AOC though, because like he tried to campaign in the Bronx in 2016, and he just got like ran out of the place basically. And that was like when he was they had the New York primary.
Ghostbusters.
Yeah. But he said there was the New York values thing where he's like, I'm President Trump or fucking Donald Trump at the time. Like, Donald Trump has New York values, and it's like you have to compete here. Like, you have to try to get elected here ostensibly, and you're just gonna shit on the state. Like, that's what I mean. If liberals are guilty of it too. It's just like geographical warfare. It's like Arkansas, these places, they just don't matter. We need to like make the blue states better and become a separate country or something. And I don't know, are they trying to bridge that gap here, or just like what's... I don't get what they're doing.
I don't know what they're trying to do.
It's like the system is so shitty that it's like you kind of have to, if you do want to ban lobbyists, which should be done, I guess the only way to do it is like just point out the hypocrisy and pick off a Republican and say like, yeah, this is a common sense law that should just be a thing. Ideally we would not have to work with those people, but I guess this is the only chance she has.
Yang thoughts. When I'm president, the last thing anyone will be concerned about is the name on a boat. We have much bigger things to focus on. I don't even know which one.
Yeah, what is
that
he
about?
referring to?
McCain. He's probably talking about the McCain.
Oh, the McCain, yeah.
The
aircraft
USS McCain.
Yeah.
And how like they had to cover the name on the side of the ship that said USS John McCain because Donald Trump didn't want to see it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I see.
On Memorial Day. Yeah.
Man,
Wait, I found a
he
better
is
one.
Petty.
Andrew Yang. Someone said that the media we consume is analogous to the food we eat. If that's the case, Twitter is definitely candy.
Okay. Can you keep going with this?
Yeah, I feel
see.
like he needs to develop that idea.
Yeah. YouTube is steak.
Dude, he's fucking crazy. I love him.
Facebook is eggplant parmesan. Where are we going, Andrew?
Oh, I don't know. Instagram is avocado toast. You millennials triggered. I just found out my book, War on Normal People, is getting translated. It's fucking.
He has a book called War on Normal People.
Andrew Yang, my book, Kill All Normies, is getting translated into 3 other languages. It's a book called War on Normal People. That's almost the same thing as Kill All Normies.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what his fan base is like the internet world, you know.
Oh.
What if Andrew Yang is just Angela Nagel in a mask?
Yeah, it's a psyop. It's a deep fake by Angela Nagel. I don't know. I guess that's it. We were about an hour. A couple other interesting things happened this week.
But if you're talking about bipartisan stuff, this is something that almost did happen. Trump was trying to let an arms sale go through to Saudi Arabia, so he called a state of emergency to bypass Congress, because normally Congress needs to approve an arms transfer, and they would not have approved it in this case because of Khashoggi, not because they, bombed a school bus of children, but
Right.
but there is some interesting stuff going on in terms of opposition of supporting Saudi Arabia and some stuff in the Middle East.
Oh.
Wow.
It just occurred to me we should have done because it's Pride Month, bipartisan Pride. Well, it's the end of the episode, not the beginning, so impossible to.
What if that
Can't
becomes
get into
like
it.
the third way people are like, we're not bipartisan anymore, all right? It's a spectrum. It's like a full, like they have their own.
I'm pan-partisan.
I'm pan-partisan.
Yeah.
That's Kirsten Sinema.
Very true.
Extremely true.
Yeah.
What was I going to talk about? The Vengaboys, which are, if you don't know them, they're just extremely bubblegummy, sort of like 90s dance-ish, techno-ish band. Played a show in Austria and unfurled a giant Antifa flag a couple days ago. Which is just weird. I guess they're the spiritual opposite of Ace of Base, I guess, at this point. They sound like Ace of Base, but Ace of Base are Nazis, in case anyone didn't know.
And what was the crowd reaction?
Apparently pretty positive. Crazy. Also, last thing I'll talk about is Duterte is apparently...
yeah.
Duterte,
my man.
Duterte in the Philippines.
He is the gift that keeps on giving.
Who, if you don't know who he is, he's a fucking crazy person who's made it punishable by death to possess, drugs.
Well, he said, the Germans killed 3 million Jews sick, and therefore I will kill millions of drug dealers.
Yeah.
That was one of his famous.
He just made it a point to lowball the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Just to get attention.
No, I think that was a legit error on his part.
Yeah, he's a real fucking weird one.
And an ally, U.S. ally.
Yeah. Trump likes him. But he's also
not an ally though.
Right.
No, we do help. We help Duterte.
Well, actually, maybe he is, because the headline of this Newsweek article is Philippines President Duterte says he was once gay, but I in quotes, I cured myself.
Oh my God.
He's the true bipartisan.
How did he do that? He put on like a Andrew Yang designed headset and it just like warped his genes to make him not gay?
Yeah, he put on the depression helmet and Mike Pence fucking did the pokey rap out of him. Now he's not gay. According to Rappler, a Filipino news publication, Duterte mocked his political opponent, Senator Antonio Trillanes IV. Wow, cool. By saying his movements show he is homosexual.
Movements?
His movements. Duterte also reportedly confessed that he was gay before he met his ex-wife, Elizabeth Zimmerman.
What?
Good thing Trillanes and I are similar, but I cured myself.
Wow.
This is the craziest, fucking weird macho, shit talk. You're gay. I was, but I cured myself.
I mean, a lot of those guys, like the hardcore, militia, junta people who are surrounded by death and, masculinity, there's a lot of homoerotic stuff there, so,
Sure, yeah.
It's probably a lot of undealt with sexual energy, like Bolsonaro.
He goes on to say, when I began a relationship with Zimmerman, I said, this is it. I became a man again. Wow.
Yeah, I want that kind of pussy.
The Philippines are fucking crazy. I have a friend who's from the Philippines. He told me in the 90s, I can't remember when Duterte became president, but whoever's president at the time is just in action movies. It'd be like if Trump was just also in the Avengers and shit.
Yeah.
As president.
Yeah.
Okay. They put Bush in an Iron Man comic, I remember, in the 2000s. They drew him in and stuff. It's weird.
Oh man.
Weird. Trillanes went on to say, Duterte is gay, so I am gay. I don't care if I'm gay or not. This is fucking insane.
Duterte also said that he would start a war with Canada.
Yeah, he fucking rules.
Yeah.
What was the context for that?
So he threatened to attack Canada if they didn't pick up their trash. So this was actually a legit reason, I think, for Duterte to say something insane. And some Canadian company was just using the Philippines as a dump. So he's like, you pick up your trash or I'm attacking Canada, Trudeau. And he like called him out.
I would kind of love to see that. No, I shouldn't say that.
I mean, yeah, there's just great YouTube clips of just like all the crazy shit Duterte says.
Here's some more shit he
What if he
said.
actually tried to invade Canada? It would be like entertaining. I mean, it would be bad, but entertaining.
Duterte, only I can say it. Bishops are sons of bitches. Damn you. It's true. It's true. Most of them are gay. They should come out in the open, cancel the celibacy, and allow them to have boyfriends. I
know, because I was gay.
Yeah, I was, and so can you. Yeah, I don't know. I guess moral of the story here is Duterte, relax and read some Yang, dude.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Get some Yang thoughts in your head, and just be yourself, I guess. I guess that's about it, unless anybody else has got anything particularly...
Stories.
Fuck it.
I can call it. Yep.
Yep, let's call
Yeah.
it. All right.
You want to talk about Iran? Next time.
We talked about it on our last episode, or last bonus, about how the Secretary of Defense is a former Boeing CEO.
Oh, right.
And he's like thinks that failure is like good for the samurai. He was like talking about samurais and shit.
Yeah,
and saying
explain
that
to the families of the Ethiopian airliner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Failure is Yang thoughts.
All right. Yeah, Yang thoughts. Failure is the true beginning or some shit. Kind of speaks in like fortune cookies. I don't know. Racist. Totally.
He's playing it up though. He's like challenging you to say something racist about him. He's like playing chicken with you.
I think he's awesome.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
I'm looking forward to the next segment of Yang Thoughts.
I'm going to have to like compile a lot of these because he seems to be on one right now. All right. Well, that's the show for the week. Thanks, everybody. If anyone has anything to plug, I guess we should go now. I'll start off. If you live in Bushwick, come to Yoko, the show I run with Ian Fidance and Claire O'Kane. The next one is this Tuesday, which will be probably the day after this comes out. We've got a great lineup. We got Mike Racine. We got a bunch of other people. It's been a good show. Please come out. It's bi-weekly now. As for Pride Month, it's bi-weekly. It's fucking first and third Tuesday of every month. Good comics, cheap drinks. And if you're in Denver, I'll be at the Colfax Comedy Festival on July 11th. And I think that's it for now. I got some other stuff coming up, but we'll plug it closer to the dates.
Yeah, if you're in Bushwick next Sunday, June 9th, we're having a variety show at the Grove, which is a secret location. But if you DM me on Twitter at Anders Lee here, I'll give you the address, send you the tickets. It's going to be a lot of fun. We got some good comedy acts, Simple Towns doing sketches, Ben Wasserman, some comedy, also from Kate Owens, and me, myself, Brittany Carney, and my friend Charlotte Calvert. And then we're going to be closing out with Itch Princess. This is a nice punk band. That's next Sunday, June 9th, 8:30. Also, I know we were saying reformism is like not sufficient, don't do the electoral thing, but if you kind of are tempted, it can serve a purpose here and there. Tiffany Caban is running for district attorney in Queens, and I have been asked to plug canvassing if you're in the New York City area. The election's in June. She's running against mass incarceration. If you go on cabanforqueens.com, you can find out how to help canvass. We need a lot of help if you're in the Queens area.
Andrew Yang, if you put matcha on or in anything, I will probably try it. This man's running for president.
If you put it on sriracha, I wonder. Matcha sriracha.
Sure, why the fuck not?
Well, I've been trying. There's really nothing that sriracha doesn't go on, but I really think matcha would be bad.
You'd eat it,
I'd
yeah,
still
for
eat
sure.
it,
Naomi, you got anything?
Yeah, I got. I'm previewing my debut hour that I'll be doing at the Edinburgh Fringe Fest this year on June 8th at the Woolly Mammoth Theater in DC as part of LitFest 2019. Check it out.
Cool.
And you got some other dates in New York in July.
Yeah.
Which you can follow Naomi to find out about.
And watch me on YouTube, youtube.com/redacted tonight. Check out the show. I talk more about abortion in Saudi Arabia on it.
Cool. Hell yeah. Mellie, where can my listeners follow you and read your stuff?
Yeah, you can follow me at Apona West on Twitter, and on Medium at Apona West also. Yeah, other than that, like, I'm trying to start an abortion fund for Eastern Wyoming. And other than that, like, if you have money to spare, find a rural place in America that you never think about and throw money at their abortion fund. You can go to nnaf.org and find like Arkansas or South Dakota or other underfunded places that probably need help with access.
We'll put the links to those in the show notes so people can find them easily. Andrew Yang, someone said to me yesterday they liked my Twitter account because, quote, it's obvious it's you. High praise, and then a smiley face. I don't think that's...
He found his voice.
I don't think that's a high praise.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound right.
Praise you give when you're high.
I think it was a backhanded compliment that he didn't understand was backhanded. All right. Well, yeah, I think that's it for the week. How do we end this show? I forgot. Oh, it's finished. It's finished. All right.
Cool.